we're a go.
All right, welcome everybody. My name is Toby Zellers and Tim Sandage, and we're excited to tell you about accreditation of commercial software. We're going to try to help you understand this journey, this path to the whole accreditation process and why that's important, and hopefully have a little bit of fun with you, because this is a dry subject. So how can you talk about such a dry, boring subject and have fun? So that's my challenge. So I'm going to say myth busting. So there's a lot of myths about accreditation, about security. What we're going to try to do is talk about those myths and debunk them. So thank you all for your attention. So our agenda today is we're going to give a little bit of history of accreditation specific to the federal government, but it also impacts other areas as well. Talk about some of the customer requirements, talk about security and accreditation myths, and then provide you some resources. Certainly can share all these resources with you afterwards. Happy to share cards outside or at the end of the presentation here, but I think we got to step outside with that. Okay, so a little bit of history of the accreditation process. So we're both old guys, so we go back to what's called the Rainbow Series, right? And I think somewhere in my basement is all these books. But you know, the orange book was near and dear to my part. The orange book is in the upper corner there, and that's where things like C2 security is defined. Anybody here familiar with C2 security? Anybody? Yeah, you're all old, like me. All right. So that was just the reality of computer security back in the 80s, early 90s. Tim?
Yeah, and so then, if anybody remembers back in 2002 when we came out, you know, with the with FISMA and DITSCAP and DIACAP and some of these others, you know, you can really see, you know, from the E-Government Act, all of these different regulations and so forth that have come out over the years. And, you know, they're really difficult to understand, they're difficult to digest. And as you're gonna find out, there's a lot of myths that get created around this. It's like, oh, I'm mandated to do this, I'm mandated to do that. And then now in the cloud area, you're gonna find out here in a second, if you go to the next slide, that we have even more, you know, elements that have to be followed and so forth. So again, kind of going back to, you know, what came out of the E-Government Act, it was really FISMA, you know, for civilian federal agencies. And then for the DoD, we had DIACAP and DITSCAP, and then now that's evolved to the Risk Management Framework for DoD as well, which is under FISMA. And then we used to have ICD 503, and now that's evolved as well, or it continues to morph. So really that's where a lot of confusion happens. And as I said, now that we're in the cloud, you know, that now we even have more regulations that are cloud specific, as you'll see here in a second. So how many people have heard of FedRAMP? You know, is the whole concept of, hey, I've got to be able to go take my cloud service offering through a certification accreditation so that I can, you know, certify once and sell to many. And so that was really the idea and the concept. And it was something that the JAB was a representative of the DoD and civilian agencies and so forth, and it was supposed to be something that satisfied consumption of cloud services to federal and DoD agencies. But then we came out, DISA came out with the DoD SRG, the Security Requirements Guide, and so that's another, you know, added element or certification accreditation. And so really kind of helping people digest that and understand, you know, what you have to do, when you have to do it, how do you get an agency sponsor, how do you get a DoD component to sponsor you. All of those are pieces that continue to create confusion and also create myths that we have to debunk on a daily basis. And then as you see, the stuff over on the other side is really existing certifications out across, which impacts a lot of state and local government, impacts a lot of federal agencies, you know, also a lot of commercial agencies. And again, we deal with a lot of that where there's myths of, okay, you know, one of the big myths, especially for AWS, is, well, AWS has a FedRAMP, so if I just move my workloads into AWS, I inherit their full FedRAMP package. And so those are things that we hear on a constant basis. And so that's why we're kind of trying to help people understand that these are either real myths or we need to debunk them.
Okay. So, you know, cybersecurity is something we all have to deal with. And, you know, I was talking to somebody this morning about how there's an academic study about how passwords are totally ineffective. I once worked for a security company that'll go nameless, except you all use LinkedIn, who figure out who that is. But if you walked around the office at night because we had really good security and changing our passwords every 90 days, but there was no single sign-on and everybody and every system had a different password, you just lift up keyboards and everybody had a cheat sheet underneath their keyboard with all their passwords. So I don't know how secure those passwords are. Virus checks, virus scans, well, they're only as good as the update you last got, right? Vulnerabilities should be discovered every day, and then you got to go back in time. You got to use the Wayback Machine to track those things down. On the accreditation side, you know, a myth might be, well, we're going to get the work done, and we don't want to get slowed down by including the accreditor early. Well, you know what? The best way to get something accredited is to bring in the accreditation team early in the process and have them a part of your development cycles, right? So that they're aware of what you're doing. They can alert you to things that might take you down the wrong path, and they're a part of, you know, you're building that system, because the success of your system only happens once it has an accreditation and you have the authority to operate. Sources, where do you get your software? Is there a software control chain? Do you know the life cycle of the software products you're using? If you're in the open source world, do you understand what the lineage is of all those products, all those packages, all those pieces are? It's really important. Another myth that I hear a lot is, oh, if it's in GovCloud, it's accredited. Well, you know, we're able to put services into GovCloud and support them with US persons, but that doesn't mean it's an accreditation yet, all right? We then work with the government and the FedRAMP and the JAB and the 3PA. We do what we have to do to get the accreditation of services, but just because it's an AWS GovCloud or US East or US West doesn't mean a service is accredited yet. It's compliant, but it doesn't mean it has that ATO specifically, and you need to understand what the status is of all those services as you use them. I used to work for a backup company, and we used to say, you know, backing up is practice, but restoration is show. Just because you're backing up your data doesn't mean it's safe, right? When you back up your data, you got to practice, you got to rehearse the recovery of those systems. You got to recover those systems to a different place. You got to recover your mission systems and not assume that you're going to have anything left, because hurricanes happen, airplanes fall out of skies. This is real business, and the continuity of your operations is important. I wanted to do a vignette here around penetration tests that involved a gun and shooting Tim, and they wouldn't let me do it because of security reasons. But yeah. Penetration testing is, and it's kind of a funny thing, you can look it up on YouTube, but you know, penetration testing is not a be-all, end-all. It also may have unintended consequences. So be very careful with penetration testing. Obviously work with Amazon, get permission, open up a ticket if you want to do pen testing on an AWS system. So penetration testing is just one tool. The best thing for you to do is use best practices and AWS well-architected frameworks and the advice of solution architects from AWS and our senior consulting partners that have accredited and certified engineers and solutions architects. That's all really important. The best way to demystify cybersecurity at your customer, at your agency where you work, is to include that security team from the beginning. Know the difference between accredited versus approved. You got an approved product list, let's say. And let's always back up. Everything we do, let's keep it backed up and practice the restoration. Okay, Tim?
So everybody's heard of FedRAMP. Everybody, and a lot of, you know, we're seeing a lot across the organization, across our community, that we're constantly having customers come to us and say, I want to get FedRAMP, you know, accredited or certified, or the federal agency that I'm working with says, you know, my product or service, you know, needs to be FedRAMP accredited. And so, you know, one of the big things that we come across a lot is that, you know, okay, great. If you need to go through FedRAMP, you know, do you have an agency sponsor? Do you have a path to go through JAB? Because one of the big issues that we run into, especially with, you know, our partners and our customers, is they have a desire to go through some of these certifications, but they don't necessarily have a path to get through those processes. The other thing is making sure, do you even need to go through FedRAMP? Because if you're a service or a, you know, piece of software that gets installed in the federal agency's use of AWS, whether it's in GovCloud or East-West, you're not required to go through these certifications. It's only for a PaaS or a SaaS or an IaaS type service. It's specifically, FedRAMP is for putting cloud service providers through a certification so that they can host on behalf of a federal agency. And so, those are one of the biggest myths that we deal with is really, you need to make sure that you have not only the path to an agency sponsor, JAB, and then if you're actually a cloud service as a SaaS, PaaS, or an IaaS, then yeah, you need to go through that process, but ultimately making sure that you have those different agencies and JAB paths. Next slide. Another thing is the myths that we run into is how many people are using AWS right now and building workloads in AWS? How many people use Amazon Linux? So one of the things that, Amazon Linux is a great version of an operating system in Amazon, but it wasn't built specifically, especially with the federal government or CJIS or some of those types of workloads involved, because you can't, implement FIPS 140 validated encryptors. So, a lot of times customers go out and they build using Amazon Linux and then say, hey, I'm going to go through a regulated workload. And you find out, well, yeah, but you're using, unfortunately, a service that wasn't fit for purpose. That's where we say you should use Red Hat or you should use, some other operating system that does meet those federal mandates or those mandates in there. Pen testing, Toby already talked about pen testing. It used to be that you had to log in at root and that you also had to get, different elements, set up before you could pen test and so forth. And we've actually, made it much easier to pen test because, as Toby said, it is one of the things that you should do, and it's a requirement. You still need to make sure that you follow the rules of engagement within Amazon and submit the request. But, the other myth that we see a lot of times is people say, well, I can't pen test in my environment, and that's an untrue statement. You just have to follow the rules on how you go through the pen testing process. Next slide. And then, as I said, again, the FIPS 140, most people know the difference between FIPS 140 certified or FIPS 140 validated, right? So the validation, the one that you actually have a validation certificate that the FIPS 140 has been approved for use in a certain security configuration and by the security policy. And so those are the things that we also need to make sure that when customers are building workloads in AWS, especially if they're going through a compliant workload, whether it's FedRAMP or it's CJIS or it's DoD, that they're making sure that they're using validated products. And AWS has FIPS validated products, and we have partner solutions that are FIPS validated, but we need to make sure that we work with those ones that have a true validation certificate. The other thing is the showstoppers there is that if you're not using DNSSEC is another one that we run into a lot, especially in FedRAMP. If our Route 53 service isn't necessarily, A, it's not inside GovCloud, and B, it doesn't meet the DNSSEC standard. And so you've got to make sure that you have an alternate DNS capability, that you can run DNSSEC. So it's one of the things that you've got to be, very, aware of as you're going through some of these regulated markets, because we've seen it where customers build something without getting our advice. And they go in and they try to get, certified or accredited in certain places, and they run into walls and they can't get through them. How many people have heard about our ATO on AWS program that we launched yesterday? It's an official APN program now. So that's why we stood that up, was to get in front of some of these myths that we counteract with our partners and our customers to say, we want to make sure that we educate and tell you what the options are before you spend real money and time and effort to go through some of these processes, because we don't want you to find out after you've spent a lot of money and wasted 12 or 18 months to walk through a certification process and then find out that you can't obtain that. So that's really why we set that program up. I think I kind of covered most of these, right?
I think we're good here. And once again, these links at the bottom are something that you can follow to learn more. I mean, my go-to links is aws.amazon.com/compliance. And I also like to use the partners page, looking at the marketplace, because there's a lot of third-party products that address controls and security needs that are found within the marketplace and our partner community. So those are all good places to look for information.
And one more, if you back up one. The other one right there, that's one of the real valuable links, is also if you are building regulated workloads on AWS, make sure that you're checking that services in scope page, that the service is not only in scope for our, say it's in FedRAMP or DoD, that it's in scope for our existing FedRAMP accreditation so that you can leverage it, because again, that's another big showstopper, that somebody goes and uses a great AWS service, but it happens to not be in scope of our FedRAMP. It's definitely a showstopper that you can't, they can't use it within, your FedRAMP or your DoD package. So make sure that you leverage that link, because we update it constantly, and there's constantly new services that are coming online. But we need to make sure, that's again why the ATO program is set up, is to help advise customers and partners on that. Next slide.
So just, GovCloud itself, as we're going down that path, there's a lot of misconceptions about GovCloud, and we want to dispel some of those things. As Tim originally said, just because you're in GovCloud doesn't mean your service is accredited. Most agencies have requirements for software to be FedRAMP, but if your application is managed by you in your own virtual private cloud, FedRAMP doesn't apply to your application. It applies to the infrastructure that you're using. You still need a system security plan. You still need to get the authority to operate in whatever domain you're operating in. And that varies by agency to agency. So getting an authority to operate in HHS for an application, maybe you could leverage that accreditation package, or maybe not when you go over to the Department of Energy or when you go over to the Department of Defense. And the example of the IRS 1075 workloads, they can only be authorized in AWS GovCloud. Is that a myth, Tim?
Yeah, it's a myth. One of the things, how many people have heard of IRS 1075? So it's based on NIST 853. It's very similar to FISMA or FedRAMP. It's primarily used a lot in our state and local government, especially for Department of Health and Human Services, organizations that process, payments like child support payments and some of those. So they have to do annual reporting for IRS 1075. And there's obviously a big push to move those types of workloads to Amazon. But there's a myth, and I hear it all the time, is that, well, I can only put those types of workloads in GovCloud, and that's not necessarily the case. And so, we can actually run those types of workloads just like other regulated workloads in our east-west environments too. You just got to know between which compliance vertical that you're looking at. If there's a specific requirement, it's usually around ITAR, it's around citizenship or something like that, that's going to drive the location of the region of utilization, but it isn't being driven by the compliance, activity.
Right. FedRAMP isn't just GovCloud. US East, US West, but all four of those regions have FedRAMP. It's FedRAMP moderate, not FedRAMP high, but not all workloads require that FedRAMP high. On the DoD SRG side, they're all have a provisional ATO for impact level 2. Right now, if you need to go higher, then that's where GovCloud would be much more applicable to what you're doing. So, how we work together and solve your customers' problems, you really got to start with what's the risk profile of the data, what's the mission impact of an insecurity, and you can follow and work backwards from there to see what the best way to address it as far as the compliance standards go. Dis and miss, Tim?
Yeah. So this is another thing, how many people have heard of the DoD Security Requirements Guide? So again, back to my earlier statement, originally FedRAMP was supposed to also extend to the DoD, but we've got, additional control set. Again, a lot of it is based on the same practices and control sets of doing a FedRAMP workload. But, there are very specific things that you've got to go through for DISA. In some cases, you do get some reciprocity. So, as Toby just talked about, if you get a FedRAMP, moderate, you can get reciprocity for a DoD IL2 in some cases, and then also for FedRAMP high. There historically you could for an IL4. Again, we've got to make sure that we check with the agencies as these programs evolve and as things change. We constantly get customers that come and say, hey, if I do this, then I automatically get that, and it's not necessarily always the case. And so, a couple of the myths are really around what is the reciprocity, what are the interconnections between FedRAMP and DISA, and then how does each authorizing organization, whether it's DISA at the DSOG or it's the FedRAMP PMO, making sure that our customers understand the differences, the nuances, and the enablements that we in the ATO program, help our customers and our partner work through, so that they don't make those costly mistakes and work through a process and find out that they don't have the ability to gain some of these authorizations. Another myth that we run into is the citizenship piece. Especially when you're working in DoD. For IL4, you don't have a citizenship requirement, but for IL5 you do, and so we need to make sure that again, that's why our GovCloud region, we have a FedRAMP High, we have a DoD IL4 and a 5, and it's run by U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. And so, but one of the myths that we get is that if I'm running an IL4, I have to mandate that as a partner to be able to build that, and so that's not necessarily it. And as you can see, there are some showstoppers, again, very similar to FedRAMP. If you're not using, certain, validated encrypted products at a FIPS 140 validation level, if you're not doing DNSSEC, if you're not, using dedicated hardware in some cases, or isolation in the IL5 arena, there's some things that you definitely need to work through, and that's where our team, as well as our partners within the ATO on AWS program, can help kind of advise and work through that with all of our customers and partners, because again, it's all about making sure that we break down those myths and make sure that you're not making costly mistakes. So as you can see, there are some reciprocity, the DoD personnel requirements, and then some DoD showstoppers that we just went over.
Okay. Well, so obviously the reality here, and this is busting these myths, is the cloud service provider has a FedRAMP JAB provisional ATO, and there's very specific requirements there, versus the cloud service provider has a FedRAMP non-DoD agency provisional ATO versus a DoD assessed PA. And so all these things are a lot of details. And what's really important to a software vendor who's not part of this world is forming alliances or consultancy agreements with companies that understand the space. Maybe a company's a 3PAO and can actually act to help with the FedRAMP accreditation, but if they're not your 3PAO, they can do consulting help to help you with DoD with any of these compliance things. It does get confusing, and so that's why if you're smart about this, you can make a business advising other companies, and if you're just a product company and you want to play in the government environment, then you're going to want to align yourself with a consultancy that can help you. I spent a lot of time in my career in the intelligence community, so let's debunk some of the stuff there. First of all, when we were awarded the C2S contract, and I know Sue talked about that in the keynote yesterday, people referred to C2S as a region, C2S region. And while that was easy when there was just the one region awarded under the C2S contract, things have changed since that contract was awarded in 2013. So I like to straighten people out and say C2S is a contract. It's a contract between Amazon and the US government, and under that contract, we first deployed a top secret region. It was on a top secret government fabric and accessible to those agencies under the US intelligence community that have access to that top secret network. Obviously, the rules of the intelligence community, ICD 503, is the accreditation foundation for that. We also now have a secret region that's available to those customers using the C2S contract. So C2S is not a contract, it's not a region, it's a contract. And we're going to continue to innovate and expand our region presence within the C2S contract as well. So everybody's, stand by for that. Getting back to the whole the Linux thing, skipping ahead one, every agency has their own flavor of Linux that's their core Linux. Well, the problem is many of these Linux baselines are classified. So you can't even work from it on the low side, on the unclassified slide, and then bring it up to the high side, because foundationally that Linux that you're working with is classified. So what happens often is a standard Linux is used that then is patched, or you start from something like a Linux maybe derived from the CJIS versions that are posted in the marketplace, and work from that, where there's very little then changes that need to be made to make it acceptable. Common myth is that firewall concept. If we say these classified networks are air-gapped, and then people assume that there's a firewall. Well, no, a firewall is not an air gap, right? And so we get software provided to us to run on the classified network that goes ask NIST what time it is, goes out to an NTP server, and say, what time is it? Well, I'm not accessing the internet, I'm talking to another government agency. But you're on an air gap network, there's no firewall, and so things fail, and those failures are often security problems. ICD 503 grants ATOs to systems, not products. So many times your system, your software, your product may be used at agency X and you've gotten an ATO. That doesn't mean it's automatically going to be used immediately by other agencies. They may take that accreditation package and approve it, or they may adjust it for their own environment. You've got to work with your customers to understand that, and you've got to be willing to share what you can about that security accreditation package. In many cases, you didn't control that accreditation. You might have provided input. So you're going to want to make a government-to-government introduction from the users in this agency here that were granted an ATO, so that they can provide security packages to your new customer that's over in this other agency. And that's how you're going to work across the community. The last example here, our product is used in production at Agency X in the top secret region, so we're approved everywhere. And that's that point. Just because it's approved, every agency has their own accreditation authority, and they may respect that and grant through reciprocity of the use, but they don't have to. We have a marketplace. AWS Marketplace is in the commercial regions. It's in AWS GovCloud. It's also in the top secret region. And this is a phenomenal platform for the consumption of third-party software, and it's something I'd love to talk to all of you about and absolutely see you after the same. But there's a lot of myths here too, like I need to be in FedRAMP before I can be in the IC Marketplace, or I need an ICD 503 accreditation. Actually, no. In our marketplace agreement for the IC Marketplace, we asked you to support the customer's accreditation process, but it doesn't mean you have to be pre-accredited. It means you have to answer questions. And it's the same questions that if you were selling a software product for an on-premise installation, and they were getting a C2 security ATO in 1991, or they're getting a DSKID 6.3 accreditation in 2003, or an ICD 503 accreditation in 2019, they would still be asking for that same information from you as the vendor in order to complete their system security packages. Another myth here is around facility clearance. So a DoD facility clearance, also known as an FCL, is an artifact of the DoD's implementation of the National Industrial Security Program. And so that FCL is managed by the Defense Security Service, and companies can get a top secret or a secret facility clearance. But the intelligence community is broader than just DoD. And our contract was originally awarded by a non-DoD intelligence agency, and therefore the vetting for the marketplace is not based on a DoD facility clearance, but it's based by their own vetting of the Foreign Ownership, Control, and Influence Foundations from the NIST. So you have to be approved by that agency to be in the IC Marketplace, and it takes a while. So the other urging I make to companies that want to participate in the IC Marketplace is take care of that paperwork first. We'll give you the forms to fill out. It's about who owns the company and who are the key management personnel, and it validates that those are US entities. And through that process, then you'll be allowed to be in the marketplace. And no, you don't have to be pre-accredited, as I said before. So Title 50 of the US Code defines who the IC is. It's 17 agencies, but it's not all of those 17 agencies. You know, there's plenty of people at the FBI that are not sitting on a classified network to do their day-to-day job, but the FBI is part of the intelligence community, and they have bureaus that certainly do work at those levels. They have their own authority to approve, so you've got to work within their rules, and their rules could be different, even though they're in that same umbrella. And what's I think really good is that NIST defined security controls in a document called SP 800-53. So NIST 853 defines the same controls that are used by FedRAMP, that are used in the DoD SRG, that are used by ICD 503. Where the dials are turned on those different controls may be different, but it's the same basic controls, and there's many tools out there that help you manage the accreditation process that can help you get there. If any of you use Telos Exacta, that's a good example of a commercial tool that can help you understand the controls, what controls apply to your product, so you can pre-answer those security questions if so asked by your customer. There's an alias here, ICMP at Amazon.com. That'll go to me and a number of other people, so ping us. All right, anybody get that joke? Ping, it's hard with the things. Raise your hand if you get that joke. All right, I got one guy who got that joke. Ping me if, and my coworkers, if you want more details in the IC Marketplace. Okay? Just a couple other little things. A lot of these accreditation regimes cross. So if I'm an NCIS, right, and that's, that's cool because I'm on TV and, the whole NCIS thing's working. My wife loves that show. But I'm doing classified work that's intelligence derived, right? I've got to be accredited under multiple accreditation things. I got CJIS I got to worry about. I got 503. I got SRG. But once again, they all fall back to the same NIST 853 controls. Last myth here is our agency can't use GovCloud because we're deployed overseas. Well, if you're DoD and you're sitting in Frankfurt, right, on a military base, you're actually in the U.S. You're in a part of a U.S. entity, and therefore you can use GovCloud for that U.S. mission, right? GovCloud and respecting the ITAR component of GovCloud does allow U.S. entities operating as a U.S. status overseas to access it. So you can do that. Okay, Tim?
So how many people have ever heard of Center for Internet Security? How many people think it's a real place? It's a real organization. One of the myths that we get constantly is, people download the guides or they download the different benchmarks and so forth, and then they start using them, that are in violations of the licenses for CIS. And so they're a very significant partner of AWS. We work with them a lot. The key myth that we try to always help them with is that, if you're an individual and you're consuming the benchmarks, or you're leveraging the benchmarks for your own environment or your own area and so forth, you can use those. And you can also, for partners that want to integrate or automate some of those benchmarks, like how many people have heard of the CIS Foundations benchmark for AWS? So it's a great capability. It's a great service. I actually helped, put it together several years ago, but it's, as a PDF, as a download free, tool, you can leverage it that way. But once as a partner, you actually automate or you integrate that within your tool, you've got to license that through their program. And so one of the myths that we run into a lot is like, I didn't know CIS was a real place. I didn't realize I had to go and, follow that process. And so, it's one of those things that, the same thing with the hardened, Amazon machine images. How many people know that CIS sells pre-hardened images on AWS Marketplace? So the same thing, you can download them. You have to pay obviously a premium for those hardened, or you can actually harden your own. But if you're a consulting service, if you're actually being paid to harden somebody's operating system using those baselines, again, you need to make sure that you're licensing and you're following the proper licensing, because you as a consulting partner are being paid, to deliver. So the licensing ends up being slightly different than a consumer just using it directly. Next slide. So, so this is just kind of giving you the ways to go through and make sure that you're being, compliant with their standards. So CIS has a secure suite program, and so you can join it, just the same thing. And the reason why we know some of these, myths is because we've broken some of these rules ourselves. And so our inspector service, our AWS inspector service, we had to become a CIS secure suite member, and we had to make sure that we had the right memberships according to the right operating systems and so forth. The same thing is, how many people have heard of AWS Quick Starts? So we automated the CIS Foundation as a quick start, here a couple of years ago, but it was the same thing. It wasn't in scope for our existing Secure Suite membership, so we had to go back and make sure that we updated that and got that set up. So again, there's a lot of great resources that this company puts out. It's also based on most of their security capabilities, and all of their benchmarks and their guides are consensus based. So another myth that we run into is it, well, I don't really like some of the benchmark elements that are in some of these guides and so forth. Well, great, myth busted. You can actually be a contributor to those, and you can actually, join some of these free memberships and actually say, hey, I want to be able to change some of the consensus-based, controls or some of the elements in that, and so you can reach out to them for that.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the resources that you certainly want to go to. So Amazon.com, the government-education/government, lots of information about supporting government through standards, compliance, and then you go to the compliance link where there's, as we saw before, plenty of places you can go there to help you understand each of the different compliance frameworks, whether it's in the US or international, shows how we satisfy those compliance requirements and what you need to do the same. AWS GovCloud is fundamental as a set of regions, 2 regions that allow you to build applications in a way that will deliver a FedRAMP SaaS solution to your customers, or just allow you to host ITAR data, allow you to meet the requirements of the DoD SRG impact levels 4 and 5. So much you can do with AWS GovCloud. GovCloud is a multi-tenant cloud, just like the other Amazon regions, but it is vetted and is restricted to US entities, and we have some rules that allow you to maintain the compliance with ITAR as well. Then Marketplace, I spoke about that earlier, Amazon.com/marketplace. So many, there's over 4,000 products in Marketplace. Many of you have products in the commercial marketplace. Many of these products can help you or your customers satisfy the security controls necessary for an ATO or an accreditation. In complex systems and SaaS systems, you may want to take advantage of the Marketplace to build those things into your solution. And Tim and his program around ATO and AWS take advantage of third-party software to accelerate that ATO process. So not necessarily from Marketplace, but leverage the community, the folks downstairs in the Expo Center. Many of those companies focus on security type things. Amazon has a lot of white papers around security, and just we do, I think, a great job of just documenting everything from best practices, processes. The well-architected framework has a big security section to it. There's 6 different overviews of AWS security. We're really sincere in delivering to you the most secure cloud infrastructure, and then that doesn't work if you don't secure your product on top of that. And we're very strong about our guidance that you want to get training. You want to take advantage of the great training that's available on solutions architecting around AWS and the security components there, so you can deliver secure solutions on top of that. Governance is important, data governance, user governance, being able to deploy thousands of user accounts and manage that. There's tools that you can see downstairs about that. There's tools downstairs that will talk about the data objects themselves. So you can have a data lake where I can get to one piece of data, but Tim can't. And that's also very interesting. And then the whole logging. I've got customers that log everything. Logging is really important. They never throw a log away. They never know when they're going to need that information. We have tools that support logging, and there's also a wealth of third-party tools down there. So this link to security/security resources, very helpful as far as you go forward. I like this guide here. It's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And then we have a document, the URL at the bottom, that aligns basically AWS to the CSF. And it breaks it down. The CSF is written where it addresses identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Those are fundamentals of computer security. And what we do is we map various services and various features of those services within AWS to the CSF. This is a great place to start if you want to get your arms around what the government's doing here. Okay. Some more email addresses. So to get more information around GovCloud, reach out directly to the GovCloud Business Development team. Obviously, you can work with your account manager or your partner manager, but oops. I think I ran out of time. Here we go.
Yeah.
The Marketplace, the GovCloud Marketplace team is also available to you. And we were talking before about ICMP at Amazon.com. That's also about the IC Marketplace. So with that, I think we're out of time, Tim.
Yeah, I think we got one more slide. And
yeah, just the last thing I want to talk about is Reinforce. So in a couple of weeks in Boston is a security-focused conference called Reinforce. If you haven't taken a look and security is important to you, whether you're a CISO or a user of security products, we urge you to sign up for Reinforce. End of the month in Boston, fantastic event, and Tim will be there, Ted will be there, your whole team.
The whole team will be there.
Yep, I think that's about it.
All right, yeah, with that, the other thing, one of the URLs that we missed, just because we launched our program yesterday, was the ATO on AWS. So if you go to amazon.com/partners/ATO, you can find out more. There's actually ways, if you want to get involved as a partner, there's links to take you to sign up and become a partner of the program. If you need to consume the services, if you're an organization trying to work through FedRAMP, or you have questions about some of these areas that continue to be mind-boggling in the compliance and security space, get on that site, reach out to our team, and we're happy to help you. That's what we stood up the program for, was to be that catalyst and outreach for our customers and our partners. So with that?
Well, a number of security-related sessions. It's getting kind of late in the second day here, but we may be able to go back and check these out through the archives, and if we're able to record these things. So hopefully you'll be able to reach out and look at the program guide, and hopefully you hit some of these sessions as well. So with that, thank you all very much. We appreciate your participation.